Deep in the mountains of Kyoto, where the cherry blossoms bloom even before winter has completely passed, there lived an old Zen master named Daiki. His temple was small, built with wood salvaged from an ancient fire, and its walls were full of cracks that let the dawn light in like golden pathways to another world. One day, a young man named Haru arrived, with restless eyes and a heart full of questions. "Master," he said, bowing, "do you believe in destiny?" Daiki did not answer immediately. Instead, he poured tea into two unequal cups, one smaller than the other, and offered the larger one to Haru. "Why do you give me the large cup?" asked the young man sitting down on the tatami. "Because it was closer to me," Daiki replied with a faint smile. "But you could think it's because you're thirstier, or because I want to give you something better. Which reason is the true one?" Haru frowned, confused. "I don't know." Daiki drank from his cup and looked toward the horizon, where the mist was beginning to rise over the valleys. "What you don't know is where the truth resides. Nothing is a coincidence, Haru, and at the same time everything is. Only when you stop seeking logic in every thread of the universe will you be able to see the complete tapestry." Haru looked at his cup with new eyes. The steam rose in spirals, as if carrying a message that he was not yet ready to understand. That night, Haru decided to stay at the temple. The breeze was gentle, and the song of the crickets filled the silence with an inexplicable calm. Although he barely knew Master Daiki, he felt that their encounter had not been a coincidence. In the early hours of the morning, he was awakened by a subtle sound, the creaking of the temple's wooden floor under slow footsteps. He got up and, guided by the faint light of a paper lantern, followed the sound to the inner garden. There was Daiki, kneeling in front of a moss-covered stone. He was doing nothing. He was simply observing. "Master?" whispered Haru. Daiki did not turn. He only raised a hand, inviting him to come closer. "Do you see this stone?" he said finally, without taking his gaze away. 20 years ago, a lightning bolt struck this garden and split a tree in two. Part of the trunk flew through the air and, when it fell, it revealed this stone. Since then, I've been observing it every morning. Haru looked at it, not understanding what made a simple rock so special. "It was no coincidence," the master continued. "The lightning, the tree, the time. Everything was necessary for this stone to reveal to me what I had to learn." "And what did you learn?" asked Haru, intrigued. Daiki smiled as one recalls something that cannot be put into words. That the universe makes no mistakes. It is us who believe we understand what happens. But the real, the profound, it cannot always be explained. The wind moved the garden leaves as if to underline those words. Haru, in silence, began to sense that perhaps his arrival at the temple had not been a mistake either. The next morning, Haru helped Master Daiki with the temple tasks. They collected water from the spring, swept the leaves from the garden, and offered rice to the crows that, like every day, perched on the old, rusted bell. While hanging some clothes to dry in the sun, Haru asked again, "If everything is part of something greater, why do things sometimes hurt so much? Why is there loss, error, separation?" Daiki put the broom aside and sat under a flowering plum tree. With a gentle gesture, he invited Haru to do the same. "When a seed breaks, do you think it is dying or being born?" Haru lowered his gaze. "I suppose it is being born." And yet, the master added, "From the inside, it may feel like a break, like the end." Silence stretched between them for a moment. Only the faint hum of bees and the dripping of a wet stone could be heard. The mistake is not always a mistake. The loss is not always a loss. And what we think distances us often brings us closer. But you only see it when you stop seeking explanations and learn to contemplate. Haru felt something loosen inside him. It wasn't a logical answer, but there was something true in it, as if the meaning wasn't in the words, but in the space between them. So, what brought me here is also part of that. Daiki nodded slowly. Every step you took, every stumble, even your confusion, nothing is lost. Nothing is separate from the whole. That afternoon, as the sun lazily slid behind the mountains, Daiki asked Haru to accompany him on a small path hidden among the bamboo. They walked in silence for a long while, until they reached a clearing where the remains of an ancient broken statue rested. Only the base and part of the face remained, covered in moss and dry leaves. "Do you know who it was?" asked Daiki, kneeling in front of the sculpture. Haru shook his head. "A monk from centuries ago. He was loved, then forgotten, then remembered. And now look, his image lies here as if it had never been important. But every time I pass this place, I feel like he is speaking to me." "What does he say?" asked Haru. "Nothing," replied the master with a peaceful smile. "But in his silence, he reminds me that everything that comes also goes, and that this too is part of the invisible order." The wind blew strongly, moving the bamboo as if silently applauding that revelation. Haru looked at the stone fragments and understood something strange. The statue, broken and forgotten, also had purpose. Even in its ruin, it conveyed something essential. "Sometimes," said Daiki as he stood up, "the universe speaks more clearly through what has been broken than through what still remains intact." They walked back to the temple without saying a word, but in Haru's heart, something had settled. A feeling not of certainty, but of trust. As if, for the first time, he didn't need to understand everything to know that all was well. That night it rained. A fine, persistent rain, as if the sky were delicately washing every corner of the mountain. Haru couldn't sleep. He sat in the temple doorway and watched the drops fall on the stone steps. Daiki appeared beside him without making a sound, wrapped in his woolen cloak. He sat next to him, and for a moment they only listened to the rain. "Today I remembered something," Haru said, breaking the silence. "When I was a child, I got lost in a forest. I was scared, I cried. But in the end, an old man who happened to be passing by found me and took me back home. My parents never knew who he was." Daiki looked at him attentively but didn't say anything. "For years, I thought it was an accident." Haru continued, "that I was lucky. But now, I don't know. I feel like that moment somehow led me here." The master nodded gently. "The universe doesn't write with ink," he murmured. "It writes with wind, with rain, with encounters and farewells. Sometimes only years later we manage to read what it meant." Haru felt a wave of nostalgia, but also a serene warmth. "What if it's all been a preparation?" he asked. "What if everything I've lived through was the way life taught me to arrive here?" Then Daiki said, "You've begun to see with the eyes of the heart." The rain continued, but it no longer sounded the same. Now it was like an ancient whisper, like a voice saying, "Nothing was a mistake." The next day, Daiki asked Haru to climb with him to the top of the hill, where a solitary tree guarded the horizon. The ascent was silent, but not heavy. It was as if the mountain itself recognized their steps and gently opened the path for them. When they reached the top, the master stopped beside the tree, an old cedar twisted by the years and the winds. There, on a stone, rested a small wooden box, wrapped in fabric worn by the sun. "This box has been here for more than 30 years, said Daiki. "My master left it before he departed. He asked me not to open it until I understood one thing." "And what was that?" asked Haru, intrigued. "That everything that happens, happens as it must. That the perfect moment is not created, it is revealed. And that the deepest truth is not sought, it is recognized when it arrives." Daiki untied the fabric and opened the box. Inside, there was only a dry leaf, a small white stone, and a handwritten note. What you see makes no sense until you stop trying to make sense of it. Haru read it silently. He felt something inside him open, like a flower that didn't know it was closed. So, there is no plan? He asked. There is a rhythm, the master corrected, like the water that finds its way. It doesn't plan it, but it arrives. And in that flow, everything that happens is necessary. The wind blew with an almost mystical calm. Haru closed his eyes and, for the first time, didn't feel the need to understand, only to be. And being in that moment was everything. During the days that followed, Haru stopped asking questions. Not because he had all the answers, but because he began to understand that silence also teaches. He woke up with the song of the birds, gathered firewood, served tea with care, and each gesture became a form of meditation. One morning, while sweeping the temple, an unexpected breeze caused a sheet of paper to fly between the wooden pillars. Haru caught it in midair. It was a fragment of ancient calligraphy with a single phrase, "What finds you was also looking for you." He took the sheet to Daiki, who was carving a dry branch to turn it into a ladle. "Did you write this, master?" "No," Daiki replied, without stopping his carving. "I found it many years ago, in a crack in the ground, next to a heart-shaped stone. You could think it was by chance. But it wasn't." Haru smiled. "Because nothing is a coincidence?" The master lifted his gaze and held the young man's eyes for an instant that seemed eternal. "Because everything that comes when you're ready to receive it. And if it hasn't come yet, it's because you're still learning how to see it." Haru carefully kept the sheet. He didn't know what path he would take next, but it no longer worried him. He finally understood that each step was, in itself, the destination. The universe didn't need to be understood, only accompanied. The last morning was clear, as if the sky had been washed during the night. Haru woke up before the sun. He packed his few belongings, greeted the garden like an old friend, and made one last cup of tea. Daiki was waiting for him at the threshold of the temple, his hands crossed over his lap and an ancient peace in his eyes. "Are you leaving?" he asked softly. "Yes, master, but not as I arrived." Daiki nodded. He didn't ask where Haru would go, nor what he would do. He knew those answers would come on their own, just as Haru had arrived. "Remember this," he said, as the young man adjusted the strap of his backpack. "The universe doesn't need your control, only your presence. Don't chase after signs. Become one." Haru bowed his head with deep gratitude. "Thank you for teaching me how to see." "I didn't teach you anything," the master replied with a faint smile. "I only showed you the mirror." The young man descended the path, and each step he took was no longer a search, but a return to himself. The song of the birds, the crunch of the leaves, even the stones beneath his feet, everything seemed part of a secret choreography. And deep within his being, he understood. Nothing was a coincidence. Everything was a gift. And every encounter, every loss, every turn, was the perfect echo of a universe that always knew the way. All it took was to stop and listen,